Your sweet, sweet lips, your perfect nose, your rosy cheeks, your 10 little toes, your precious little pee-pee, your wondrous size, your tender bottom, your pink chubby thighs.
We've waited so long for you to come. I'm your dad,
And I am your mom,
and we can see it's perfectly true. You're perfectly, perfectly you.
Welcome to BEPE Presents. Birth and Early Parenting Educators is an alliance of professionals interested in and focused on the first period of human development from conception to birth and breastfeeding. This is a dramatically important aspect of human development, perhaps the most important time for human beings in their development. And this is because we've learned recently that the baby in the womb is extraordinarily sensitive and vulnerable and open and communicative, as we were never able to know before. And we want to get the message of these new discoveries out to parents so they can benefit from them as soon as possible. This program you're about to see is one in a series of programs that we've prepared for you, which we hope will be very fascinating and illuminates this period of human development.
You're perfectly, perfectly you.
My life has been trying to figure out how bonding and attachment work, and I think they're very complex, and I'm still working them out. There's so many things that we've changed in the nursery and with mothers. It's worth bringing them up and discussing them and talking about them. First, if the baby is born without a meconium and with breathing spontaneously and pink and active, we don't anymore use the indwelling catheter in the nose or mouth. And the catheter is quite bothersome to the baby. And once you've used a catheter on the baby, he remembers sometimes, and he thinks the catheter might be a breast, and he has a memory. And we have stayed away from the catheter at all costs when the baby is breathing spontaneously and has no meconium and is nice and pink. Then we examine the baby very quickly and make sure that a nurse or a doctor listens to the baby and feels his abdomen and everything is okay. And we do not take a great deal of time with this. Usually this can be over in a couple minutes. And then the baby should go to the family. The baby really belongs to the family.
Eccolo.
È Pietro, mamma, è Pietro! A posto, buono?
Sì, ben arrivato, Pietro.
Ciao! Dammi un cucchiaio.
Quando vuoi, te lo prendi.
Vai, ora, in questo momento. Vai.
And we recommend that the first hour and a quarter belong to the parents. And then you can give the shot of vitamin K and the eye ointment. Now, the bath can wait for a couple, 3 days, since the baby is covered with a protective coat that is color, you can see in the back, it's white, and you don't have to rush unless the baby is very smelly, which occurs in about 1 out of 20 babies, and maybe the amniotic fluid ruptured ahead of time, and it's important to be able to wash that baby off. And maybe the mother can place him on her chest, skin to skin, and he gains a great deal of heat. In fact, we used to use a warmer over the baby, or an incubator to warm up the baby. The mother is faster at reheating the baby, and when she reaches the right temperature, she turns off her heater and cools, just cools the baby. Now the father also heats the baby, but he doesn't have a cooling mechanism. So the mother is amazingly connected to her baby. And she's connected with all sorts of mechanisms that she may not know about.
Come si chiama?
Leandro.
Leandro. Che ore sono?
Meno qua, meno 18. 17.
Guarda come ti sta cercando con gli occhi. Ora lui si decide a ciucciare un po'.
Ce ne saranno un'altra concentrazione.
The baby starts at about 30 minutes if you want to do this. And he will crawl to the breast. And if you put him in the middle line, and he will want to go to the breast because you've not rubbed any of the amniotic fluid off of his hands, and the breasts contain amniotic fluid, and he goes towards the breast. And what he will do in the beginning at 30 minutes is to choose which breast he will go on. And you cannot touch him except on his bottom, and he will kick you on the lower abdomen, and that will stimulate uterine contractions and cut down the bleeding. And then he will very, very slowly move to one side or the other, taking time out to rest, taking time out to suck on his hands if they've not been washed, and they remind him of the nipple. And he will slowly go to one side or the other. And then, before he goes on, he will, at about 40 minutes, he will slowly rub the nipple and take the nipple and elongate the nipple. And when the nipple is elongated, it allows him to go on the breast easier, and he will just go on the nipple. And he will suck for 5, 10, 15 minutes. And he's decided to take the breast. And it's a very, very interesting phenomenon. Then he will look at your face, the mother's face, and he will look right into her eyes, and then he will connect the face to the voice. He's heard your voice for 8 or 9 weeks or longer. And when he goes onto the breast, he remembers that voice because he's heard it so often. And 4 hours later or 3.5 hours later, he knows your face. He knows what you look like by connecting the face, the voice, and the smell. And it's quite a remarkable thing, his identification and the rapid identification that he makes with you.
Cos'è che ti stai cercando?
Ma sei proprio un mostriciattolo. Mamma mia che mostriciattolo che è. Sono tutti così mostriciattoli. Come nati? Sembra un occhietto. Sembra un occhietto. Non avevo nemmeno voluto guardare la testa quando sei uscita. Stavo così male. Cosa c'ha sulla fronte?
C'è un po' di schifezze.
Ah, solo sporco.
And in the first 45 minutes, the baby has a long, long period of the quiet alert, which is state 4, and the baby looks at the mother, and he looks right at her. And this is a special state. It's the learning state. And there's much to begin life looking at your mother. And so we think that the baby belongs with the father and the mother in the same bed as she delivered in at home, or in a bed where the mother can be alone with her husband and take in the baby. And this is especially good as a bonding time. They don't necessarily bond now, but it's so special that they have this time together. And the mother and father are inspecting the baby. And they looked the baby over. And maybe they had wanted a boy, and they imagined that he would have lots of hair and he would be smiling. And they got a serious little girl with no hair at all. And it takes them, they're taken by surprise. And takes a while for the baby to grow on them. Maybe an hour or two, or maybe 5, 6 days. Each parent is different. Some mothers say that they're bonded immediately. We think that this may be true for a certain kind of bonding, but after they've nursed and for several days, they become intensely, at a certain time, intensely bonded to the baby. And at this time, they would not allow anybody to touch their baby that they didn't know. And they would hurt anybody or kill anybody that would touch the baby. And that's, a private feeling. And I say when they were not allowing anybody else to touch their baby who they didn't know, that's the time that I think that they're bonded. It's useful in the first hour to have your husband just undress the baby to see what the baby looks like and to have a chance at the baby also. And when this is done, you'll find that for the next 3-4 months, he will sort of always be overjoyed to take the baby for a little walk or for something else, because he gets hooked on the baby also, even a little bit more. So if you can give him 15 or 20 minutes with the baby to carry it around in the first or second hour, it will be really useful, since he will begin to fall in love with the baby too.
Proprio si abbandona.
One of the things that we can do in the first hour of life is the mother can breastfeed the baby. And that's part of the baby-friendly initiative of UNICEF, which has created an enormously successful way of getting the baby to breastfeed, and to breastfeed a long time. But you want to wait not forcing the baby on the breast. Never, never forcing. And you want to wait, if there's been no anesthesia, until the baby decides he wants to eat. And when he or she wants to eat, they make a mouthing movements. So when you put him on the breast, he's ready to eat. Now, you might take advantage of imitation. And if you open your mouth like this and let the baby see it, have the baby hear, you will find that most of the babies will open their mouths if he's in alert state, and then you can put him on the breast. So he sees what to do. You open his mouth simply by imitation. If he doesn't open his mouth, you can put him on the breast gently. As he is approaching, he knows exactly what to do with the nipple. And so you hold him here, and he may go on the breast. If he doesn't, you can take him away and for a few minutes. But you'd like to feed him in the first hour, and you have some special milk with lots of immunoglobulins, and they defend against all sorts of infections. So if he can get a good amount of milk, he benefits greatly. Now, as he suckles, he stimulates you to produce oxytocin, and he also produces oxytocin. And oxytocin is the cuddle hormone. And as he is sucking, he's getting a hormone that links him to you and links you to him. And it's very, very good. It also makes you a little sleepy, the hormone, and makes him very, very calm. And you are also very calm. And it raises the pain threshold, so you don't feel as much pain when he's sucking from the breast. We would like to feed the baby, this is a change, at least 9 to 10 or 11 times in the first 24 hours, and take him to the breast. And what we're doing this for is that he will start to have a very large stool and get rid of the contents of his intestine, which are loaded with bilirubin, the pigment. And it gets out of the system, and usually we don't have to worry about bilirubin. So usually if you feed him at birth, and then he wakes up and makes the signal that he wants to eat, you feed him at an hour and a half or 2 hours, put him to the breast, the other breast, and then you feed him at 4 to 5 hours when he's hungry, when he's making the mouthing movements. And he will usually have a stool within these 3 feedings, and it's very important. You can get him your milk to appear much earlier when you feed him 9 to 12 times in the first 24 hours. And it's rich, rich milk that contains colostrum and all the antibodies. Now, the other changes that we've made in the nursery is that we've closed the normal newborn nursery. The mother has the advantage of mainly staying only 2 days, but she can get to know her baby very, very well in 2 days. She can feed it maybe 10 times each day. And she can change it. She can see what the humors are like. And when the mother has the baby is quiet. It does not cry. If you take and put the baby while it's asleep in a little bassinet and it can't see the mother or feel her, the baby wakes up and at a certain time and then cries a great deal more when he's not in the arms or can see his mother. So the baby is very, very different when he's with the mother and when he doesn't cry. And we like him not to cry if he doesn't have to. And I'll tell you a secret. The baby usually will cry, and if he's picked up in 90 seconds, he usually stops crying. So we'd like you to pick him up within 90 seconds. I know that you can't do this all the time. You can do it 90% of the time, and he gets a great deal out of your attention and your interest. And this has something to do with his becoming securely attached to you. When you pick him up when he cries, you're not spoiling him. I'd like to emphasize, you're not spoiling him. You're allowing him to gain confidence in you and that you're reproducible and you do the same thing all the time. And that really makes a secure attachment his entire life.
Non è stata molto favorevole al bagno.
The baby has 6 states of consciousness, and I just want to go over those states. The first state is one of the sleeping states, deep sleep. And there he is so asleep, it's difficult to wake him. And he will not move at all in his sleep, except you'll notice breathing, and the breathing will be very regular. And every once in a while, you know, he may jerk, but that's the only movement he has. And then in 20-25 minutes, you know, he will switch his sleep state to what we call REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where you can see under his eyelids at some time that the eyes are moving, but he's sleeping. And he sleeps for about 25 minutes, and the breathing is very irregular. It's, he'll breathe a deep sigh or a breath and another breath, and then he'll have a pause, and then he'll breathe again, and he will breathe rapidly for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 breaths, and then he'll have a pause, and he'll move in his sleep. He will move, and you'll think he's waking up, but you know he is asleep. and you'll have to get used to what that looks like. He'll move an arm, or he'll move a leg, and he'll be in another spot on the bed. The next is waking up, and he wakes up with a big yawn, and he goes to sleep the same way, and that's called state 3. The REM sleep is 2, and the waking up is 3, and going to sleep also is 3. Now 4 is the learning state, as I said before. He looks at the mother and he looks right at her, and he looks eye to eye when he's close to her, and he's very interested in faces. And he's very quiet, and he holds his hands up here like this, making little fists sometimes. But his body tends to be rather quiet, and he's taking in what his mother and father look like. That state is shared with the active alert, which is state 5. The baby looks around the room and looks at everything and doesn't look at your face. And he's a little bit more active, but he doesn't cry. And crying is the 6th state. Active alert is number 5, and number 6 is screaming or crying. And that makes up the 6 states of being in the world. He has a choice, and he will about 80% of the time pick one of the 2 sleep states. And he's up for a very short time. Before feeding, a little bit of time, and then a little bit of time after, and he's in one of the awake states, the quiet awake or the active alert. And this hour you will never forget. You enjoy all the work you've done, and you're looking at the beautiful baby. You can enjoy the baby and not rush. It's a special hour to take your time. Nobody should come at you. Nobody should ask anything of you. You should enjoy being together and enjoy the product and the boy or girl that you've produced.
So my name's Sarah Buckley. I'm a family physician by training. I've also done my diploma of obstetrics, so I'm qualified to care for women having normal babies. I have my own 4 children, all born at home, which I guess is an unusual decision for a family physician. But what happened through those experiences, I learned a lot through those bodily experiences about birth. And then what interested me with my scientific background was to go to the medical literature and really research some of those topics that I'd experienced, the choices that I'd made, and really what the ultimate outcome was to discover that there's so much scientific research that supports gentle choices, that supports non-interventionist approaches in pregnancy and particularly in birth and in many aspects of parenting as well. The conclusion I've come to through looking at the whole hormonal orchestration of birth, the hormones that happen that make labour happen, but also the hormones that have powerful psycho-emotional effects for the women in labour. The conclusion I've come to is that the whole crescendo of labour hormones, which peaks at birth, is designed to create this unique and optimal conditions for the mother and baby in the first hour after birth. The mother and baby are both in a unique hormonal situation that will never again happen for that mother and that baby. And Mother Nature's plan is that that hormonal balance, the hormonal situation of the mother and baby at that time is designed not only to protect the mother and baby physically, for example, to protect the mother from postpartum hemorrhage, to ensure the baby makes an easy physical transition to life outside the womb, to ensure the baby's blood sugar is up, to ensure the baby makes an easy breathing transition, a circulatory transition. But that hour after birth is also designed so that Mother Nature's plan unfolds to enhance long-term outcome for the mother and baby. And these are the outcomes of breastfeeding and attachment. I think in medicine we tend to have a very narrow view of success or safety in birth. We think just mother and baby surviving the birth. But Mother Nature's plan is much wider than that. Mother Nature wants us to have offspring who survive and thrive and go on to have more offspring who survive and thrive. So this longer-term outcome of survival, of enhanced well-being, begins at the moment of birth as well. And this optimal hormonal orchestration also enhances the chance of successful breastfeeding and successful attachment between mother and baby, because we know physically that the mother's willingness to do all the things that the baby requires for survival is critical for survival of the individual. And what we're beginning to discover through neuroscience as well is that relationship that mother and baby form with each other, that begins at that first meeting and from preparation during pregnancy as well. But that's the foundation of lifelong emotional health and well-being, of the ability of the baby to form other attachments. The relationship with the mother is the first template, and Mother Nature sets it up that template is an optimal template in those minutes and particularly the first hour after birth. Well, I think what we've done in a medical sense is we've become very narrow in our focus. I think that maybe 200 years ago we were very concerned about mothers dying in birth, and some of that was actually caused by medical interventions that we did. The iatrogenic, the doctor-caused infections that happened that killed many women after birth. So we focused on saving the mother. And now that we have a situation where most mothers are healthy and well and can expect to survive the birth, we're focused on saving the baby. And so we've put this undue focus, all of our energy really into this statistic that we call perinatal mortality, the number of babies surviving around the time of birth, and about a week to a month after, depending on the definition. So we're so focused on this perinatal mortality, on babies surviving the birth, that we've really forgotten, we haven't added in these extra outcomes of breastfeeding and attachment. And I think it's very unfortunate because, as I said before, the contribution of breastfeeding and attachment to lifelong health and well-being is enormous, and we're discovering more and more about it. And I think it really behoves us as physicians to look wider, to look much wider at the subject of what we're doing at birth and what is an optimal outcome for the mother and baby, because just the mother and baby surviving the birth is not an optimal outcome. We need optimal breastfeeding for lifelong health for the baby. We're really discovering so many benefits lifelong to breastfeeding, reduced risks of cancers, reduced risk of immune problems, reduced risk of diabetes, enhanced well-being on many, many levels, and actually enhanced survival even in their very young years. So breastfeeding and attachment are not optional add-ons, they're really an intrinsic part of this whole system that is Mother Nature's design for mothers and babies. Epidural is an increasingly common intervention in labour and birth. I think in America around 70% of women have epidurals overall, and it's been sold to women as a no risk, as a no risk or at least low risk intervention that will relieve them of pain in labour and won't affect their baby. But what we're discovering is that neither of those things are actually true. When I was at medical school, actually there was a misconception around that the drugs that are given in epidurals don't cross over to the baby. There was a concept of the placental barrier. But what we know now is pretty much everything that gets into a mother's body will get into the baby's body. So some of the risks of epidurals are direct drug toxicity effects. And I think it's very ironic that we have a lot of consciousness around exposing our baby to drugs and toxins in pregnancy, and we would avoid taking drugs, even avoid taking, a pain-killing drug for a headache in pregnancy. And yet when it comes to the time of birth, we lose that awareness that whatever we take into our bodies ends up in the baby's body. And that's true of epidural drugs. So epidural drugs are administered into what's called the epidural space around the spinal cord, and traveling through that epidural space are nerves. And the drugs that are administered are local anesthetics. They're like what you get at the dentist, when you have a tooth pulled. So these drugs numb the nerves that transit through that epidural space. But at the same time, that epidural space is very well supplied with blood vessels. So anything that enters that epidural space will be absorbed into the bloodstream. So it gets into the mother's body pretty quickly, 10 to 20 minutes. And when it's in the mother's body, it goes straight through the placenta to the baby. So any drug administered by any route, including by epidural, crosses through to the baby. And the other problem with epidurals, so that's one mechanism of effects on the baby from epidurals, but as the epidural enters the mother's body, it causes some profound disruptions in her bodily processes. It disrupts the processes of labour, but it also disrupts her own bodily physiology. For example, it unbalances her sympathetic nervous system, which causes a drop in blood pressure. And pretty much every woman with an epidural has a drop in blood pressure, which is why women with an epidural are given an IV, to load up, to increase the volume in her system, to counteract this drop in blood pressure. But when her blood pressure drops, that means blood supply to all the organs in her body drops, and those organs include her uterus and baby. So a drop in blood supply will affect the blood supply to her baby. At the same time, what the epidural drugs do is interfere with her delicate hormonal balance in labour, with the orchestration of the labour processes that's naturally happening and has happened for millions and millions and millions of years in every female labouring mammal, actually. So the processes of labour can be profoundly affected by an intervention such as an epidural. And what happens, particularly the mother's oxytocin levels. Oxytocin is the hormone that causes the rhythmic contractions of labour, and the mother naturally produces it during labour. It travels from the pituitary gland in her brain down to her uterus and causes these rhythmic contractions. But when an epidural is in place, it actually shuts down, decreases, slows down the oxytocin release. And what that will mean is it'll slow down her labour. Yeah? So her labour will be slowed down, and when labour gets slowed down, particularly in a hospital setting, the mother's on a timeline. She needs to proceed at a certain time scale, and when her labour slows down, she'll be given drugs to speed up her labour. So the epidural slows labour down, the drugs are given to speed up the labour, and we get into this cycle where those drugs can cause more complications, particularly for the baby. The mother can't feel those when the drugs are given to speed up labour more. The contractions will be stronger, and the mother can't feel them because of the epidural, but the baby can. The baby is being exposed to those longer, stronger, closer together contractions, and that can cause abnormalities for the baby, abnormalities in the fetal heart rate that tell us the baby's not getting the blood and oxygen that they need. So of course, the baby requires monitoring. We need to check for that, and there is a risk that the baby will have side effects, and the baby will, even in the worst case scenario, have such a profound side effects from these drugs that a caesarean is needed for the baby's well-being. So a drop in oxytocin causes a slowing in labour. The mother receives pitocin, labour speeds up. That has side effects for her baby. The mother with an epidural's blood pressure drops, blood supply to the baby drops. That can cause lack of blood and oxygen. That's another side effect for the baby. Another very common side effect from an epidural is an increase in the mother's temperature. We don't really know what causes this, but particularly when an epidural has been in place for a long time, her temperature can rise, and that can cause problems for the baby, not just in the womb at the time, because the baby's not meant to have a really high temperature. It can actually predispose the baby to brain damage from other insults. The baby's not as protected in the brain when the temperature is elevated. But when the baby's born from a febrile mother, from a feverish mother, whether she's got an epidural or not, there's a concern that the baby might be under the influence of infection, maybe infected itself, maybe infected from an infection in her uterus. So the baby will get a septic workup, the baby will be separated, the baby will have all sorts of tests, blood tests, maybe even a lumbar puncture, and the mother and baby be separated for that important time after birth. Several pieces of research have been done, not a lot. Some research looked at epidural babies who'd been exposed to epidurals during labour, and followed those babies up to 6 weeks. That's about the limit of human research. They found that the relationship with the mother was more difficult. The mother described their baby as more bothersome, more difficult to care for, and that may be a drug toxicity effect. The babies in the early weeks had delayed motor coordination, were less alert, less oriented, which may be, again, a direct drug effect. So another issue around this hour after birth. So as I said, mother and baby are in this unique hormonal situation that will never happen again. Mother and baby are primed through the hormones that they've been releasing during labour to fall in love with each other. We call that attachment or bonding, but it's really, as Michelle O'Donnell says, the beginning of a great love affair between mother and baby that will enhance that baby's chance of survival. Yeah, that will enhance health for the mother, because breastfeeding is beneficial for the mother as well as for the baby. So we don't want to disturb those time after birth, and ironically we've developed a whole lot of ways to disturb that time after birth. One of the major disturbances is what we do with the baby's cord and placenta, the clamping of the cord. So in common obstetric practice, the cord is clamped very quickly after birth, sometimes immediately, sometimes usually within 30 seconds after birth. And there's a long historical debate around this. It's been maybe for the last 50 years. We've decided that that's a good thing to do to the baby, otherwise the baby will get too much blood. There's been a fear around that. If you look back over many centuries of observation, of clinical practice, of wisdom, all the older midwives, all the older obstetricians, Charles Darwin's father wrote, another thing injurious to the baby is early clamping and cutting of the cord. If we cut the cord early, the baby will be weaker than it should have been, because a portion of the baby's blood will be left in the placenta and not given to the baby. And he was spot on. That's exactly what we're discovering again today, is that when the cord is clamped early, the baby doesn't receive the full complement of blood that Mother Nature intends. So in utero, the baby and the placenta form one circulatory system. The blood flows from the baby through the cord to the placenta and back again. So all the blood in that unit belongs to the baby. The second thing that's happening in utero is the placenta is performing many functions for the baby. The placenta provides oxygenated blood. It acts as the baby's lungs. Yeah, the placenta performs the function of heat exchange. It functions as the baby's skin, you could say. The placenta regulates the baby's fluid balance like the kidneys do, so it's performing the functions of the kidney. The placenta is an excretory. It metabolizes and excretes substances in the baby's circulation, just as the liver does. So it's performing all these functions for the baby. But once the baby's out, the baby needs to perform those functions for itself. And all those organ systems don't have a lot of blood supply in the womb because they don't need to function. As soon as the baby's out, all those organ systems start being active and they need extra blood to be activated. For example, the lungs receive about 8% of the circulating blood volume in the womb, but 40% when the baby's born. So all this extra blood has to come from somewhere. Where does it come from? It comes from that placental blood, the extra volume in the baby's placenta. So when the baby comes out, when the cord isn't clamped, the mother's uterus will continue to contract and will push that blood into the baby's body, will transfuse the baby with all this extra oxygen-rich placental blood. The baby needs to perfuse all those organ systems. It will ensure optimal transition to breathing, particularly. It will fill up that extra, all that extra volume that the baby's lungs need. It will help to inflate the lungs so that the baby's first breath is much easier. So that 100 mils, it turns out to be about 100 mils of extra blood that the baby gets, the baby won't get if the cord's cut. And basically, the earlier the cord is cut, the more of that blood the baby's deprived of. And 100 mils is about a third of the baby's circulating blood volume. So cutting the cord is actually equivalent to depriving the baby of around about a third of its blood volume. So that in an adult is 1.5 to 2 litres. So when we clamp the cord, it's like an adult suddenly losing 1.5 to 2 litres of blood. It's a major hemorrhage for the baby. Medically speaking, until the placenta comes out, we call it the third stage of labour. The mother is still in labour. Nothing needs to happen at that time. The mother is in this unique hormonal situation, she's still in an altered state of consciousness, and we really need to respect that time, because when we start interrupting, we actually interfere with those hormones for the mother. So what we're imprinting on the baby is the same feelings that you or I might have if we suddenly, within 5 seconds, lost a third of our blood volume, and we would be panicky, we'd be frightened, our fight or flight hormones would kick in, we'd experience extreme fear. And when we do that to a newborn baby, what we're imprinting those feelings of fear along with the process of being born. And I think that could even be a lifelong imprint that we carry, that there's fear around birth, that there's going to be hemorrhage, that there's going to be a near-death experience. We're imprinting a near-death experience for the baby at that moment, the first moments of life. That should be a life-giving experience. So Mother Nature intends it that when the baby comes out, the baby is making this incredible transition, but everything is lined up to ease that transition for the baby, to soothe that transition. The baby goes onto the mother's belly, the mother's body warms the baby's stress hormone levels come down, the baby's soothed by the mother's heart rate, the baby is warmed by the increased temperature of the mother's body under the influence of the hormone oxytocin, and the mother and baby get into this hormonal dance. The baby is skin to skin and eye to eye with the mother, stimulating the mother's oxytocin release. The more oxytocin she releases, the safer she is from bleeding, the more she warms up the baby, and the more she's ready to breastfeed the baby begins to breastfeed, and we have this hormonal dance that happens on many levels. I'm talking about just oxytocin, but it's a coordinated system that has been going for probably 175 million years. That's how long placental mammals have been around. So Mother Nature's had a long time to perfect that system, and we come in with these ideas of how things should be, but really we don't have the full information about what we're interfering with, and that's particularly true of cord clamping. And I think what we're beginning to understand is that there is a fantastic natural logic in the cord continuing to pulse and blood continuing to be passed to the baby. It's a really important part of that neonatal physiological transition. Trusting the natural process, really, and I think putting our focus into understanding the natural process rather than intervening. I mean, there certainly are times in obstetrics when the natural process would lead to a bad outcome, and we do need to intervene, and we have the tools to intervene, and we're very fortunate to live in times where we have access to those fantastic interventions when we need them. But the trouble with obstetrics is we've said, well, if this is good for those small percentage of mothers who need it, then maybe we should be giving it to everyone, and it doesn't work like that. Mothers, we can't improve on the natural processes of labour and birth, and when we start to interfere, there's a chance we're going to actually disrupt and cause harm. All right, okay. So the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative is sponsored by the World Health Organization, and one of the main outcomes that we're wanting with Baby Friendly Hospital is increased breastfeeding rates. And so the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative has 10 steps, and one of those steps is having the mothers and babies skin to skin for an hour after birth. And what's happening at that time, as I said, that hormonal situation for mother and baby is unique for that hour after birth. Will never again happen for that mother and that baby, and mother and baby are primed to fall in love with each other. And this priming is through hormones that are released from the mother and the baby. And I was talking before about oxytocin, the dance of oxytocin, that mother and baby both contribute to each other's increasing levels of oxytocin. And that's a major hormone of love. That's a hormone of bonding and affiliation and relationship and calm and connection, actually. So those increased levels of oxytocin in that hour after birth will soothe the mother, soothe the baby, switch off the stress response, and help to not just at that time, but what we're discovering also is that when mother and baby is skin to skin for that hour after birth, it actually changes what happens subsequently. So that hour of skin to skin contact between mother and baby can lead to enhanced breastfeeding, can lead to easier breastfeeding, can lead to longer breastfeeding. It can lead to more attachment and affectionate behaviours between the mother and the baby, and these are scientific studies that have been done. It can lead to lower stress levels in the baby, not only at the time, but 2 days later. The babies who'd been skin to skin with their mother had lower stress levels. So it's like dropping a stone in a pond. A lot of ripples go out from that time of mother and baby, that hour after birth, which is a very concentrated and focused time as far as Mother Nature is concerned. She wants mothers and babies to get it right, to get breastfeeding right, to get attachment right, because that will impact health and well-being lifelong for mother and baby. What I advise parents to do is really do their homework on this. They can read the articles in my book. They can go to a website, cordclamp.com, and really get all that information and discuss it with their caregiver beforehand. And you know, it's the baby belongs to the parents. The baby does not belong to the hospital. The parents ultimately have the right to accept or refuse any treatment on behalf of that baby. The parents can say, I refuse to give you permission to clamp my baby's cord. I would suggest that they do that, particularly if they think that, you know, their wishes may not be complied with after the birth. It's a very, very important issue, as I said, that has these long-term implications for the health and well-being of the baby. And there's no reason to take the baby away in that first hour after birth. One study showed that even taking the baby away for checking of the baby's weight interfered with the baby's early breastfeeding behaviour. The baby is primed to be on the mother's belly, to be looking around for the breast, to self-attach. Every other mammal baby gets on the breast by itself. Human babies don't need help to get on the breast. They need the right circumstances, the right environment, which is being skin to skin with the mother after birth, and that's the ideal start to breastfeeding. So it's got to, you know, I think it's got to come from the parents. I mean, we can educate. I mean, part of my job is to educate the physicians, to educate the midwives, but the parents have to stand up for what they know, for what they believe, and they have to stand up for their baby. You know, they're going to live with the baby for the rest of their lives. The attending physician, the midwife, will probably never see the baby again. You know, that's our role as parents, is to be advocates for our baby and for the truth that we know, and for non-interference unless necessary. And that's the other exciting thing, is I think we're learning more about the consciousness of the baby. I think that is coming into awareness in the community, that the baby is a sentient being from conception actually, but in those moments after birth, the baby is an aware, feeling being that knows everything that's happening, that records somewhere in the baby's body all of these events that happen, and therefore we need to be really sensitive and really careful about how we handle babies in those moments after birth. So if people want to know more of this information, which I've researched independently, and I've put it all together in a way that's easily understood by families, so I really write for the lay audience, yeah. People can go to my website, sarahjbuckley.com. There's articles on my website. You can also buy my book from my website, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. It has a whole chapter on epidurals, the downsides, the risks and benefits of epidurals. It has a whole chapter on the hormonal orchestration of labour, the oxytocin I talked about. It has a whole chapter on the time after birth, the third stage of labour, and really what the benefits are for the mother and the baby, and how to look at cord clamping, how to negotiate it with your carer, how to get the best outcome for yourself and your baby.